Now, a large array of world leaders, dozens of cardinals from across the globe, and tens of thousands of worshippers are expected to attend Pope Francis's funeral on Saturday. A 3-day period of lying in state is currently underway. It began early on Wednesday, with a long queue forming shortly after the public was allowed access. Officials kept the doors of St. Peter's Basilica open overnight to accommodate the large crowds who'd gathered in order to file past the Pope's coffin and pay their final respects. More than 60,000 mourners have so far paid their respects to the late pontiff. The queue stretches 2 kilometers from the Vatican.
The
profile of a pope, the profile of a bishop, the profile of a Catholic is a person who is faithful to the gospel, who knows the gospel. That is why I say that this is not a question of a profile on this side or that side, but an evangelical profile that does good to society, that does good to a society that has serious problems. We live in a world with serious problems. We live in a violent world. We live in a world where there is a lot of injustice. The truth is that these are tremendously interesting meetings to meet with cardinals from all over the world at a time of great sadness, at a time of great pain, at a time of great sorrow when the Holy Father has passed away, and I believe that we are encouraged by a very important spirit of prayer, and there is a whole program of meetings. I would like to emphasize that the Pope has generated unity. The Pope has generated unity because people from all over the world have come, very different people, to gather from very early in the morning until very late at night, and I think that this is the example that we should all follow, because it is not enough to mourn the Pope but also to ask ourselves how one can generate unity with what one does, and I think that this is a favor.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the former British diplomat and former director of the Royal African Society, Dr. Nicholas Westcott, who served as the European Union's managing director for Africa. He's currently a professor of practice in diplomacy at the SOAS Centre for International Studies and Diplomacy at the University of London. Dr. Westcott, thank you. I should say Professor Westcott, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And a lot of people from Africa, Latin America, and even the Middle East. We saw sort of images there going to the Basilica to pay their last respects to Pope Francis, a very international crowd there. That suggests that this is a truly global event over the next few days.
Indeed it is, and it is a truly global church that the Pope was the head of. He himself was an assiduous traveller visiting the congregations of the Catholic Church throughout the world, and therefore he's a known figure, a recognised figure across the whole world, one of the most recognised figures in the world. And therefore it is no surprise that people come to pay him respects, besides the immense personal qualities that he brought to that job. And he was a hugely respected figure everywhere.
And I mean, a lot of Africans traveling to Rome to pay their respects. I mean, you were the director of the Royal African Society. Why was Pope Francis so important to them?
I think for the Catholic Church in Africa, he was an immensely consequential figure. He paid a huge amount of attention to Africa, from his very first visit to Kenya and the Central African Republic to one of his last visits to South Sudan in 2023. I mean, he was already a very old man by that stage, but he traveled to a place that is not easy to go to because of his commitment to the African congregations and to, in particular, places in strife. As he showed both Central African Republic, he visited Mozambique as well as South Sudan. So Africans have good reason to connect with him, and a very large number, about 20% of the Catholics in the world, live in Africa, and that's going to be an important issue for the Church going forward in selecting its next pope.
Indeed, and we will, of course, have a funeral at the weekend, and then it'll turn to the issue of who should succeed him as Pope. And there are some who are calling for a progressive Pope like Francis, others for a more conservative vision of the papacy. I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
The papacy has been going a very long time, and there have been popes of all kinds and varieties. There has in recent years been a kind of alternation between popes who were great organizers and popes who provided great spiritual quality. And every pope has had to balance the different interests of the church. And within the Catholic Church, it's a very broad church. There are radicals, there are progressives, there are liberals, and there are conservatives. And it's a hugely challenging job to hold all these different tendencies. People, while there is a doctrine, there is a common faith, there is a creed that everybody subscribes to, but within that there's an awful lot of interpretation, particularly on social issues, which are particularly sensitive in some parts of the world, including Africa. And to find a pope who can unite the church in the way that Francis did. Some people felt he was a bit too liberal, too progressive, but nevertheless, the church remained united under his leadership. And the cardinals will be looking for somebody else, I think, who can retain that kind of collective faith within the church and appeal not necessarily to all groups within it, but to a sufficient number that the rest will rally round.
And there are a lot of whispers at the moment that the papacy will probably be returning to Europe. Would you be surprised if an African ends up as the next pope, or the odds for that don't look too good?
I would perhaps be less surprised than some other people. The time will come when there will be an African pope, no question. Whether it is this time or a future time, it's hard for me to say. Again, the African Catholic congregation tends to be quite socially conservative. And while this is popular across a lot of parts of the world, including increasingly in the United States, it is not universal. And therefore, there might be some hesitations about appointing some of the African cardinals whose names have been mentioned, who have been very strong in their criticism of Francis for being too liberal. But, you know, anything can happen. Anybody who has seen the film Conclave will know that very often unexpected things happen. Pope Francis himself was not the front runner at the beginning of the conclave. So many things can happen behind those closed doors, and I would be very hesitant to put money on any specific runner in this race.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned the movie Conclave, because although it's a mixture of sort of fiction and elements of reality, I mean, there's a lot of politics apparently involved in the choosing of a pope. You are, of course, Professor Westcott, in London. What are the chances of a British pope? I mean, there are cardinals from the UK going to the conclave in Rome, and I understand it's been about 866 years since the last and only British pontiff, Pope Adrian IV, whose papacy ended in 1159. So a British pope, or maybe not this time?
It's been a long wait, you're quite right. And I think we might have to wait a little longer. There are 3 British cardinals who will be present, and none of them are, I think, in the bookies' tables amongst the favourites. They will play their part in the selection. But as you say, I think you need one of the cardinals who has a good deal of international experience, who has worked both in the Vatican and acted as an archbishop in their own country of origin, maybe some other countries. You need somebody who has a very wide experience of the church. And that, to some extent, does limit the number of those who will be deemed suitable for it. But that said, there are a wide range of candidates, and who knows?
Indeed, and beyond the identity of the individual who is eventually chosen, the future direction of the Catholic Church depends very much on that choice.
It does. I mean, as I say, the Catholic Church will always remain a broad one with many different tendencies and nuances of faith. But it is true, under Pope Francis, who is in quite a contrast to his predecessor, Benedict, who was very much at the conservative end, the Church has liberalized in several areas. And I think this reflects social change. The social change is going both ways. There are pressures for greater liberalization. Still, though, Pope Francis himself was adamantly against abortion, for example, and against the marriage of priests. And these are issues that will continue to resonate. But the individual character of the Pope will always make a very significant difference. His personal beliefs, it will, of course, be a man, needless to say. His beliefs will impact on the Church as a whole, and that's why the cardinals will think very carefully before they bestow the papacy on any one individual.
And I have to say that your assessment has made understanding the complexities of choosing the next pope considerably easier for all of us to understand. And I want to thank you very much indeed. Professor Nicholas Westcott is a former British diplomat, former director of the Royal African Society. He served as the European Union's managing director for Africa. He's currently a professor of practice in diplomacy at the SOAS Centre for International Studies and Diplomacy at the University of London. Thank you very much indeed.